Welcome to episode 88 of the Business Mastermind podcast. Gavin here, Gavin Preston. Welcome and thank you so much for your time. Today is the second in my mini-series of episodes called Keep Your Boat Afloat, Business Survival Guide in COVID-19 Times. And I'm speaking to Jonathan Hemus. He is a crisis management specialist from a consultancy called Insignia. And we have a packed conversation in terms of packed with strategies that will work about how you need to set strategic intent, setting the main efforts and top priorities of your business, prioritizing those activities, and what communication you need to be doing throughout this process. You will get a huge amount of value of really practical things that you can be getting on and doing with in order to be able to help you through these challenging times. So straight into my episode with Jonathan Hemus of Insignia Crisis Management. Hello and welcome to the Business Mastermind podcast and another one of the special mini-series I'm running called Keep Your Boat Afloat, Business Survival Guide in COVID-19 Times. And today I've sat down with Jonathan Hemus. Jonathan is a specialist in crisis management, runs a consultancy called Insignia. Jonathan, welcome to the mini-series Keep Your Boat Afloat, a part of the Business Mastermind podcast.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Really pleased to be with you at this very important time.
So you're a man that has the knowledge of the moment in terms of crisis management, crisis training, and of course communications that sits around it. I know there's a lot of business owners out there. As the story unfolds, week or even day by day, their view, their sort of planning in their head, the parameters are changing. And I know that you've got a process that people can apply to help them think through how they plan, how they lead, how they communicate through, what is a crisis for many businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our passion at Insignia, my personal passion is to help organizations avoid needless damage to their organizations and their stakeholders through a mishandled crisis. And this is undoubtedly the biggest crisis that the world has faced for decades. It's the biggest crisis that I've been involved in helping organizations manage over the 30 years of my career. So I know lots of the principles. I don't have the answer to coronavirus, but I can give business owners advice as to what I have seen work very effectively in terms of frameworks and principles for crisis management. So
before we just dive into that, do you want to share a little bit about your background and how you've come to be running Insignia?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, really, the thing that has driven me to get involved in this area is that I hate to see good businesses damage themselves, or indeed good businesses damage their stakeholders. So I have a real passion for helping businesses to do and say the right things on the worst days of business leaders' careers. And how I got to this point is through initially a career in corporate communication. I work both in-house and for consultancies, helping to build and sometimes protect reputations of organizations. And from that point, I then began to specialize in crisis communication. I was the global head of crisis and issues for a consultancy called Porter Novelli. And then 11 years ago, I set up Insignia, which itself specializes in crisis management. And as I say, historically, we have helped leaders of businesses to deal with crises ranging from product contaminations to management fraud to cyber attacks to environmental incidents to industrial accidents. And whilst those crises themselves are different from what we're facing now, actually the principles are the same, albeit, frankly, with even more at stake than many of the crises that I've helped organizations deal with before.
So where should a business owner or a leadership team of a business start in terms, I'm sure they've already done some thinking, but
Yes.
If there was a process that they could follow, that they could just either start that work or ratify or double check their own thinking to date against, what would that be?
Okay, so what often happens in a crisis is, because this is literally an extraordinary situation, because you don't have enough information, because you're in a dynamic situation, because there's a lot at stake, because there's not enough time, because there's not enough resources, there is a danger to worst case panic, or even if not panic, start doing things without thinking about it. And even in this situation, thinking is really important. So the one thing that I see most organizations fail to do at the beginning of a crisis is to set strategic intent. Now, I'll explain what I mean by strategic intent, but I'd like to emphasize again, even in this situation, which is a monumental crisis, in fact, even more importantly in this situation, you must define and write down what your strategic intent is. Okay, so what is strategic intent? The simplest way of thinking about it is, where do I want us to be in 6 months or 12 months' time? As we navigate through this extraordinary challenge that we're facing, what do I want to be saying in 6 months' time? How do I want people to be viewing us in 6 months' time? So let me give you a couple of examples of real strategic intents that organizations we're working with have set down. So here's one. To take operational steps to emerge from the current situation as quickly and strongly as possible, whilst remaining true to our values and without jeopardizing our long-term vision. So the organization, with our assistance, has defined what the end goal is. Now, why is that so important? It's important because unless you do that, if you have a management team, in your head, you may all have slightly different perceptions of where you want to go to. So firstly, it is a unifying force for your management team. Secondly, and probably more importantly, I mentioned earlier that a crisis is a time when you don't have enough time, resources, and information, and when you're under intense pressure. By having a clear strategic intent, you can focus all decisions, actions, and priorities on that strategic intent. So, for example, if I look at the strategic intent that I quoted, to take operational steps to emerge from the current situation as quickly and strongly as possible, whilst remaining true to our values and without jeopardizing our long-term vision, that will help to guide specific actions and decisions that need to be made. So
Sure.
First thing I would say is set your strategic intent.
Okay, great. And the time frame for that then, you said in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, strategic intent must be relatively long term. Even forgetting this particular situation, I would be looking at a 6-month time frame for a strategic intent. This is not what are we going to do this week. This is where do we want to get to when we emerge from this situation. You might want to make that in this situation. If we look at a worst case scenario, you might want to think about strategic intent as a 12-month objective, but it's the promised land. It's where we are planning to end up at. But kind of to your point on time scale, what I would also encourage organizations to create is what we call a definition of their main effort or their top priority. So the strategic intent will almost certainly remain fixed throughout the crisis. Your main effort or top priority will constantly change during the crisis because that is more of a short-term focus. What is the main effort or the top priority? It is where you want to focus your attention and resources right now in order to drive towards your strategic intent. Why is that important? Again, it's important because in a crisis, and certainly in this crisis, there are a million things that you could do. And if you try and do a million things, you will make very small incremental progress against all of them, but not make very much overall progress. Therefore, whilst we'd like to do a million things, we have to focus on the 3 or 4 things maximum that are going to have most impact right now. And again, if it's helpful, Gavin, I can give you a couple of examples of what main effort might look
please.
like.
Yeah.
So again, these will change during the crisis. But let me give you a couple of examples. So right at the beginning of this process, we were working with one client whose top priority about a month ago was, our top priority right now is to ensure our crisis management capability, people and plans are ready to go and sustainable for up to 3 months. So in other words, what they were saying is, a month ago, unless we get our crisis management infrastructure ready, geared to go and sustainable, i.e. with deputies available, we're not going to be able to do anything in a month's time because we won't have the people in place to be able to implement whatever we decide to implement. So a month ago, the most important main effort is getting the crisis management team in place and in a sustainable position. Looking at last week, the same client, the main effort was defined as, our main effort right now is to ensure that office-based staff have the resources and support they need to work effectively from home. So there were 100 other things they could do, but the most important thing we need to focus on right now is gearing up our workforce to be able to work from home. So don't feel bad about not being able to do everything. In a crisis, you never will. And in one that's going to remove part of everybody's workforce, you certainly won't be able to do everything. Determine instead what is going to make the biggest difference now and focus resource in that direction.
Great, brilliant. So set your strategic intent.
Yeah.
Identify what's your main efforts or top priority. What comes next?
So what comes next is then prioritization of activities within your main effort. So in other words, setting up people to work from home requires a number of actions in order for that to happen. And those actions need to be assigned to individuals or other maybe outside resources to make them happen. So you move from main effort to a detailed action plan.
Great.
What, who, when, how.
Okay. Great. So that action plan, presumably, at every stage actually so far, would change. Now, stop. Not the strategic intent, but your main efforts and your prioritization will change, and your detailed plan will change.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. And, you know, as a slight aside here, one of the really important things to do is to work purposefully as a team and to firstly be able to keep track of what is going on. So in other words, you need to be able to capture, log and share all of these various elements that we're talking about, whatever technology you're using, because clearly this is largely going to be a virtual effort now, not people sat around a table. But literally everybody needs to be on the same page. Again, with resources extremely tight, you need to have everyone pointing in the same direction and focusing on the same goal. So having consistent information across that team, having a clear understanding of what the status is right now, having a very clear understanding of who is responsible for what and where are we on our action list, that's really crucial. And so I would strongly recommend that teams come together virtually on a regular basis to make sure that that is happening, that people are staying aligned, but also, and this is really crucial, to ensure that we are all managing today's crisis, not yesterday's crisis. And again, that is especially relevant in this situation where literally it is changing hour by hour, minute by minute. And if we've got our heads down and we're not looking up and around, then we are going to be managing yesterday's crisis.
Can I just
not
probe
today's
that a little
crisis.
bit? Because it really is such a fluid situation at the moment.
Yeah.
Could that not, if your prioritization of your main efforts, if your plans are always in flux, that could cause frustration, confusion, even overwhelm.
Yeah.
Have you?
So, so not everything will change. One would hope that half to three quarters of what was planned yesterday is still relevant today, but some of it won't be. And this is a situation whereby, for those of us who are control freaks or perfectionists, we need to adapt a more nimble, flexible, adaptable
Sure.
mindset, because otherwise you will be wasting time devoting attention to a situation which is not the same as it was yesterday. More importantly, and I should have added this earlier, Gavin, it's not just about being adaptable today. A really powerful thing that you can do is get a couple of members of your team. We call them your creative pessimists,
Yeah.
and get them away from that main group to brainstorm where could this go to next, both from a kind of macro level, but for our organization, how could this get worse? What is the absolute worst case? So you actually get soothsayers, you get a couple of people scenario planning, saying what might happen next, over the next week, how could this get worse for our business? And by doing that and by bringing that back to the team, rather than being reactive, which is the danger, as you pointed out, of kind of a day-by-day approach, you are already taking steps to either reduce the possibility of that worst-case scenario happening, because it may be something over which you have influence, or if you can't do that, putting in place strategies, measures, response mechanisms that are ready to go should that worst case occur, which means you won't be firefighting to the extent that you would be if you hadn't done that forward thinking.
Great. So there's no doubt a prioritization process of those worst case scenarios
Correct.
that the creative pessimists come up with.
Yeah, correct.
And ranked by relative likelihood.
Correct.
Okay.
And impact.
And then impact.
Yeah.
And then further action plans cascading off that. Okay, get that.
Correct.
Great. Because that is the real world that we're living in right now.
Absolutely it is. And nobody is going to predict exactly what happens in this situation. But if you do think about your business, and hopefully you will have already identified where is the worst possible impact for our business, what bit of coronavirus is going to most harm our organization, your forward scenario planning should probably follow along the same lines. Where is it that this could do most damage to us, whether it's our reputation, whether it's our people, whether it's our customers? Where are we most vulnerable? And therefore, yes, to your point, where should we be devoting most resource to minimizing the chance of that impact happening? Or if it does happen, what safety nets can we put in place to make the landing a little softer than it would otherwise have been?
Just as a slight aside, what software tools, applications are you seeing being used, other than obviously Zoom, which is stock prices shot up, but
Yes.
To help businesses and their teams are not used to working remotely to communicate?
So, I mean, it's a whole range of tools, and frankly, as a consultancy, we work with whatever the client is working with. But we're seeing a lot of people successfully using Zoom. Zoom is very popular and seems to be very effective. GoToMeeting is another one that a number of clients are using. Microsoft Teams. So there are a range of technologies for working together virtually. Again, organizations need to think about how they're going to share documents and information, both so that everybody can collaborate, but also so they're kept securely. But I think what I'd say is, I know a number of organizations are just getting used to working virtually. If you can possibly minimize the amount of new technology that you're using, you've got enough challenges without trying to get to grips with new ways of working at the same time. So you'll need to do a bit of that, but don't bite off more than you can chew.
Okay, great. So we've set our strategic intent.
Yeah.
We've identified our main effort and prioritized that, those activities. Where next?
Okay, so I think a really key area that we should look at is communication. And perhaps even more broadly, I would describe it somewhat grandly as kind of stakeholder engagement. If I simplify that right down, the people with whom you normally work are going to remember how you behaved at this time.
Yeah.
And, you can define how they remember you by what you do now. And therefore you have options. So I would suggest that a high priority for any organization is maintaining the trust of their stakeholders and ideally deepening the strength of the relationships that you have with your key stakeholders. How do you do that? Some simple principles to kind of start you off going in the right direction. Then perhaps I'll come down to some kind of structures for planning. Listen to them, hear their concerns, hear their pain, empathize. Now, as business owners, your listeners are all facing probably the biggest challenge of their entire business careers.
Yes.
And they are personally very, very worried and anxious. It's very tempting, therefore, in your communication to project your own worries and concerns and fears onto your stakeholders. Now, sadly, there is a lot of empathy generally, but if you start talking to your stakeholders about your worries or your problems or your concerns, that is not going to help you. You need for a few minutes or longer to step into the shoes of your stakeholders and say, what are they worried about? What does the world look like to them? And reflect that in your communication. I have one supplier, and of course they will be completely nameless, but when I went for them for a little bit of assistance, he told me all about the problems he was facing and how difficult it was, and therefore how he couldn't do what I wanted him to do. And he was right, he was facing extraordinary challenges and problems, but frankly it was the wrong communication for me as his customer.
Yes.
So despite the pressure and despite the reality of what you are facing, put yourself in the shoes of your customers. I mean, not literally, but almost literally. Step out of your role as the boss and say, what is this apprentice in my business? How are they feeling right now? Think about this customer who relies on my service or my products. What does life look like for them right now? So empathy, and I mean deep empathy for your stakeholders, is a critical underpinning of successful communication. Then in your communication, you need to show that you care. You need to say that you care and also prove it. And that means acting. So effective communication is about communicating and acting. If I just tell you that I care about you as a customer, it means nothing unless I can show you that or prove to you that I care for you as a customer. So those are some of the initial principles, and I can get deeper into some tactics and also kind of understanding what kind of communication is likely to work and what kind of communication isn't.
One of the things that's intriguing me at the moment is where businesses say are manufacturing a product and they cannot physically get their resources of people, raw materials, ingredients to the place of work to create that product. So their business has effectively gone on pause. How have you come across clients that are dealing with that right now, and what some of their what some of their responses are to their stakeholders in such times?
I think the first thing to say, Gavin, is transparency, honesty. Okay, everybody in the world knows that we have a monumental problem at the moment. So no one is going to be surprised to hear that you have a problem too. The worst thing that organizations can do at a time like this is to make promises or set expectations that they can't keep. So I would be suggesting open, transparent, frequent, clear communication with the people who are being affected by that shortage, if at all possible, offering them some form of solution or a partial solution or assistance in whatever way that again demonstrates that, look, I'm sorry, I can't give you your usual order of 100 widgets. I'm really sorry, and these are the reasons why. This is what I'm doing about it, and this is what I can do to help you at the moment. And it is about extraordinary measures. Let's say that your competitor can provide the product. You may even want to recommend your competitor. Now, that's an extraordinary thing to do, but I think now is the time where businesses need to show that they're not just about
Totally agree.
money, they're about doing the right thing, and that might be the right thing to do.
I've been saying to some of my clients, it's about collaboration over competition.
Correct.
You should be speaking to your competitor now and saying, how can we help you?
Yes.
We may need some help in this area, but we can help you in that area.
Yes.
And ultimately, so that we can serve a customer or a market. Let's just be genuine human beings.
Completely. I think the other thing I want to say about stakeholders before I miss it is this is also another case where we have to prioritize. So it would be lovely to communicate in equal measure with all of our stakeholders, but you won't have enough time or resource to do so. So I would strongly suggest you start with thinking about who are the 2 stakeholder groups who I'm going to prioritize for communication. And again, I would assess that based on who is most affected by this crisis as it relates to my business. So who is feeling the impact of it most? And or who is going to have most influence over my fate as a business? So often, but not always, you might come to the conclusion that your employees and your customers are the 2 stakeholder groups you should be prioritizing. I'm not saying don't talk to the banks. I'm not saying don't talk to your local council. But what I'm saying is, employees surely have to be one of the 2 that you have to communicate with. And it's quite likely that customers will be the other one. If it's different for your organization, fine, but just be very clear, these are the 2 groups that I'm going to devote disproportionate attention to.
Great, solid advice. And I know that you've got some views around how businesses can look to create an opportunity out of a crisis. I'd love to spend a few minutes on that.
Yeah, one of the things that I have learned over the years in crisis management is that genuinely, out of crisis comes opportunity. It's a time when, under extraordinary pressure, individuals emerge, teams form, and they can create great things out of enormous adversity. What kinds of things? Well, we will see organizations developing new products and services as a result of this crisis. We will see organizations working out better ways of working together, collaboration, use of technology. We will see great leaders emerge. We'll see individuals within businesses who develop skills and capabilities that they didn't even know lay within them, but come out during this time of great crisis. We will see relationships develop in ways that we hadn't thought possible. Clients and customers that we help that were previously just customers become genuine partners and do far more business with us in the future than they ever would have done if this crisis hadn't occurred. So you may not necessarily know what those opportunities are going to be, but I would promise your listeners that through this adversity we will develop opportunities, and there will be silver linings to the enormous cloud that we are enduring at the moment.
That's a really strong and positive message to end on there, Jonathan. Now, I know you're a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge around this, and you've actually been doing some webinars also. If anybody
Yeah,
wants to sort of delve deeper on this particular topic
yeah.
around crisis management and planning through the coronavirus challenging times, where do they go? How do they find out more?
Yeah, so all we are interested in at the moment, Gavin, is helping businesses in whatever way we possibly can. So I really
Right.
would encourage people to take advantage of the free webinars we're running and the downloads and the advice that is available. Best thing to do is to go to insigniacrisis.com. There's all sorts of resources there, but there's also the means of clicking on the get more information, and I will get an email, the team will get an email, and we'll get back to you. But please do reach out, because there is some really practical information and resources available, and we would love to make a little difference in helping your business to survive and prosper through this great challenge.
And that website again?
It's insigniacrisis.com.
And if people want to find you on LinkedIn or other social channels, how do they do that?
So on Twitter, I am at Jonathan Hemus Insignia. No, I'm not. I'm at J Hemus Insignia.
Yep.
And on LinkedIn, if you look for Jonathan Hemus, there is only one. So you will be able to find me on LinkedIn, Jonathan Hemus.
That's great, Jonathan. Thank you so much for your time today. And that was just gold dust of the strategies that you were sharing. I will just quickly summarize strategic intent, set that strategic intent of where you want to be in the next 6 to 12 months. What is your main effort and your top priority? What are those prioritization activities that sit underneath each of those main efforts? And what are the communication that you need to be doing with your key stakeholders to keep them engaged throughout this? Jonathan, thank you.
Thank you, Gavin.